Welcome to this edition of Fraser TV. My name is Leah Costello, and we're joined today with the former Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard. Elected for 4 consecutive terms and Australia's second longest serving Prime Minister, he was in office for nearly 12 years. Mr. Howard, to what do you owe your extraordinary level of success in implementing free market policies in Australia?
Well, the reason that we were successful was that the application of those principles worked. In the time that we were in office, unemployment fell, we paid off our national debt, the real wages of average citizens rose, and the country was prosperous. People will always support a philosophy that works.
Now, there's often a lead time, though, in terms of when you have to implement those new policies and the time it takes, especially if you're entering into a situation where you're carrying a large debt, for example, from previous administrations. Did it take some time before your ideas caught on and people began to see the effectiveness of them?
Oh yes, in the early years we had more difficulty politically because some of the reforms were controversial at the beginning, but as their benefits flowed through, people realised that that kind of approach delivered them personal financial security and prosperity. The other thing you've got to remember is that if outcomes are being delivered, people are persuaded that the philosophy that is behind the outcome is a good philosophy. Most people look at things pragmatically. Something that works they will accept.
What would you consider then to be the major successes under your administration?
Well, the biggest single success was to reduce unemployment from 8.5% to just over 4%, because the biggest human dividend of good economic policy is job security. And the greatest thing you can do in running an economy well is to give people a job, because jobs are all about personal and family security and personal self-esteem. And I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to get unemployment down to a 33-year low in Australia.
In terms of some other successes?
Well, we obviously had an enormous success in paying off $96 billion of federal government debt. We had a big deficit when we came in. We ran years and years of surpluses, and when we left office, we gave the incoming government a surplus of over $20 billion annually, a very big future fund designed to pay the costs of public service pensions years into the future, and really a fiscal position that was the envy of the Western world.
Well, and that is a concern, of course, that that Australia now has experienced a major shift to the left, as has the United States. Why do you think that this shift is happening, and what will the effect be on the free market policies that you had so successfully implemented?
We have to take a long view of political changes. There is a cyclical element. No matter how good a government may be, every government has a shelf life. But I think the important thing is the continuity of ideas. And if you look back over the last 30 years, there has been a very big shift in thinking to the centre-right in relation to markets and economic policy. Now, all of that is now coming under the hammer as a result of the worldwide financial plunge, and there is a danger that free market principles will be unfairly blamed for some of the problems the world now has.
Well, and I think that you're right. What is happening now is that the majority of the crisis is being blamed on a failure of the free market system. How do you foresee that attitude affecting people's understanding of capitalism and of markets?
Well, it's important to understand what has happened. It is true that some people have been greedy, and it is true that there has been a failure of regulation. But it is also true that the prime cause of the subprime meltdown was a deliberate government intervention, in effect forcing financial institutions to lend to people who had no capacity to service the loans. And that is at the root, the cause of a lot of the difficulty. Now, that's not free market. That's the antithesis of a free market. But that will be lost in the welter of emotional criticism of the undoubted excesses of Wall Street and other financial communities around the world, and people who've helped themselves to obscenely large remuneration packages do carry some of the blame, but that's not the only reason why things have turned to custard.
So as you've mentioned, the government does need to take some responsibility for the crisis that we're in. And the challenge, of course, is that the public and the media are turning towards the government to say, now you've got to get us out of this. The stimulus packages that we've seen out of the United States, out of Canada, and even out of Australia now are just laden with government solutions to this problem. I was wondering if you could discuss what your thoughts are on these stimulus packages.
The role of the government is to help the private sector reinvigorate the economy as soon as possible. The government can't get us out of the recession. It's only the operation of the market system that can get us out of the recession. I think what government should be doing is implementing measures to make it cheaper to employ people, to make it easier from a regulatory point of view to employ people. I think government should invest in useful long-term infrastructure. I don't think government should use the recession as an excuse to pork barrel their favourite constituencies, to give handouts to sections of the community that don't really need it. And I think we have to beware of the belief that exhorting people to spend without any particular purpose or reason for that spending is very bad economics, and it also goes against everything we have been taught as a prudent, sensible society.
So in terms of that, some of the biggest beneficiaries we've seen of government money to date have been the banks. Do you support the bailout of the banks in the way that it's been done?
Well, it varies. I think some of the financial institutions haven't deserved support. I do understand that if the aim is to get credit flowing, the stability of banks is very important. Well-regulated banks around the world, and I include the major Australian banks, have not suffered any financial difficulties. Others have. I think some banks are too highly geared, and this applies particularly to many of the European banks and to some of the American banks. It depends very much on the behavioural patterns of the individual financial institutions.
And so in Canada, for example, one of the areas where we've seen, the government stimulus packages as a convenient way of getting money now because the climate of public opinion seems to support it, are for certain companies within industries that are not successful. For example, within the auto industry, our top 3 automakers are clamoring for government money and bailouts. Do you think that they should be supported?
If governments are going to provide direct assistance, they should impose as a condition of that assistance that companies and, where appropriate, unions accept changes to working conditions that contribute to the profitability of the enterprise. I think it is indefensible for companies that have bad practices to be subsidised without any requirement that those bad practices be removed.
Now, you've mentioned that Canada is in a challenging situation because just south of the border we have, as you've called before, an 800-pound gorilla. They've subsidized some of their industries there. How can Canada compete when negotiating our trade relationships? You've had phenomenal success in Australia in terms of your trade relationship with the United States. What can Canada learn then from you in this area?
Open trade is fundamental to our economic future. Of all the things we must avoid at the present time, trade protectionism is right at the top of the list. The beggar my neighbour policies of the 1930s prolonged the recession, and surely if we've learnt anything from that period of time, we've learnt that.
Mr. Howard, thank you so much for joining us here today and for sharing your valuable insights with Canadians at a time when we need to hear them the most. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.